What today I'll be doing Kansas State. So first I'll talk a little bit about their head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then I'll go through their schedule game by game and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Chris Klieman enters his sixth season as the head coach of Kansas State and his 11th season as a college head coach. He was the head coach at one other place before Kansas State, and it was an FCS team, but he did do really well there, getting them to a 69-6 record in 5 seasons. And then at Kansas State, his record um, is 39-24. His overall record as a head coach is really good. Uh, and these past 2 seasons, he's become one of the best coaches in college football, getting Kansas State to a 19-8 record in these 2 seasons combined, 10-4 and 22 with a conference championship win, and then 9-4 last season, and I think he's a really good coach. Mm, I think he's great at player development and game planning and game time coaching. And if I was to rank the Big 12 coaches, I'd rank Chris Klieman at three, behind Gundy at Oklahoma State and Whittingham at Utah. He's a similar coach to those two because, like Gundy and Whittingham, Klieman is not recruited very well at Kansas State. They had the 57th ranked recruiting class this year, which was really bad. Uh, but I do like the kind of football that he teaches his players how to play. He has a big focus on the line of scrimmage, and his teams are very physical. He's great at coaching the lines. So on the roster, starting on the offensive side, Will Howard is transferred out at quarterback, and the new quarterback will be Avery Johnson. And before I say what I'm going to say about Avery Johnson, I just want you to know that I watched every snap of that bowl game that he played in last year. So don't try to tell me in the comments that I just didn't watch the game. I'm going to tell you his numbers in that game and just what I saw from him in that game. So his numbers were terrible in that game as a passer. He was only 14 of 31 and completed only 45% of his passes. And he had 178 yards passing, which was not very good. And he averaged only 5.7 yards per throw, and it's hard to find a quarterback with an average that bad. But he did score 3 touchdowns total in that game, and he did really well running the football. He ran for 71 yards and a touchdown on only 7 carries. So what I think of him is he reminds me some of Alabama's Jalen Milroe in a way. Now, Milroe is better than he played in that bowl game, but Milroe is a great deep ball passer with a very strong throwing arm. And I could tell in that bowl game that Avery Johnson has a very strong throwing arm, but I could also tell that he has no accuracy. And Milroe is more accurate than Avery Johnson was in that bowl game, but he also is not very accurate in that 10 to 20 yard range. So quarterback could be a problem. Now, I know he could get better with a whole off season to improve, and he is a four-star quarterback. And Kansas State, I still think is going to have a really good team, even if he doesn't play any better than he did in that bowl game. I'm high on Kansas State, and they could possibly even win the Big 12 with him playing like that. But to go any past that, they're going to have better quarterback play. So at wide receiver, they're not great here. They did bring in one good wide receiver, Dante Cephas, who should be able to help them out. Um, He spent last season at Penn State and didn't end up doing much there, probably because of Disaster Aller being the quarterback. But the 2 years before that, he was at Kent State and was a really good receiver for them. Had in 23 games, 130 catches for 1,984 yards and 12 touchdowns, averaging 15.3 a catch. But he's going to need some help at receiver. And right now, they just don't really have any other proven wide receivers. But they're a well coached team, so it's very possible that they could have a few turn out to be good besides him. And then at running back, they're really good here. Kansas State was a great rushing team last season, averaging 204 rushing yards per game. And Chris Klieman's teams are always great at running the football, and that won't be any different this year. So they returned one of the best running backs in college football, DJ Giddens, who had on 223 carries last season, 1,226 yards and 10 touchdowns, averaging 5.5 a carry. And then they brought in this spring Dylan Edwards, a running back from Colorado. Now, I know you're probably thinking Colorado is terrible, and I know that very well. But he isn't terrible. He's a pretty good running back, and I think that's probably why he left Colorado, was he wanted to get away from that horrible place. And he was a four-star running back recruit and had there last season on 76 carries at 321 and a rushing touchdown, averaging 4.2 a carry. And of course, with Kansas State's offensive line, that 4.2 should go way up. And I'm sure he'll get a lot more than 76 carries this season. I think he's going to have a great season at Kansas State this year. And he's also going to be a big help to them, I think, with pass catching. Last season at Colorado, he caught 36 passes for nearly 300 yards, and he had four total receiving touchdowns last season. And in that game against TCU last season, he had five catches for 135 yards and three receiving touchdowns. And on the offensive line, they were really good here last year. Maybe they won't be quite as good this year. They do lose two starters on the offensive line, but they brought in a really good offensive lineman from the transfer portal. He does come from an FCS team, but he was ranked the fifth player in the portal at his position. His name is Easton Kilty. He is the size of a power four offensive lineman at 6'5", at 305. And last season, he only allowed in 12 games 3 sacks and 10 total pressures. And then on the defensive side, they were good here last year, only allowing on average 20.2 points per game. And they have seven starters returning on that side of the ball. I think they'll be pretty good here again. They don't really have any position on their defense where they're going to be weak. They're pretty good everywhere, just not really elite. So on the defensive line, they returned two starters here, including their best player, uh, uh, Brendan Mott, who had last season 59 tackles and 7 sacks, nine total pressures, and two forced fumbles and a fumble recovery, and three pass breakups. And then at linebacker, they return two really good players here. They return Austin Moore, who has in 2 years combined 150 tackles and seven total pressures and 3 sacks and four pass breakups and two forced fumbles and two fumble recoveries and an interception. And then they also have Desmond Quinnell, who had last season 52 tackles and four pressures and three forced fumbles and two fumble recoveries and two pass breakups and an interception. And their secondary looks to be really good. At cornerback, they return Jacob Parrish, who had last season 44 tackles and 4 interceptions and 9 pass breakups in 12 games. And then they have Keenan Garber, who played in every game and only started 4 games, but had 22 tackles and 5 pass breakups and a pick six. So he'll be the other starting corner. And then at safety, they do lose one really good player who transferred out. Colby Savage, but they're still really good here. They've got 3 good safeties. They've got VJ Pine, who had 57 tackles and 3 pass breakups and an interception and a fumble recovery last season. And then they've got Marquise Sigel, who had last season 63 tackles and 9 pass breakups and an interception. And then they bring in a good safety transfer from Ball State, Jordan Riley, who had in 2 seasons there combined 158 tackles and 20 pass breakups. And then on special teams, their punter is questionable. They do lose their punter from last season, but kicker looks to be solid. And overall, this is a pretty good roster. So now moving on to the predictions. They start the year against Tennessee Martin, which will be an easy win. And then on the road at Tulane. So this is a game that last season Kansas State wouldn't have wanted to have played, but I think now that Tulane is not going to be near as good, Kansas State can win this one by probably at least 2 touchdowns. Now, this I don't think will be a big blowout. Tulane is still probably a decent team. I know they did bring in one good receiver from the portal, Mario Williams from USC, but they're just not going to be near as good this year, losing their coach and quarterback. I'd be shocked if they were anywhere close to what they were these past 2 seasons. And then Arizona on a Friday. So Arizona, I think, will be able to score a decent amount of points in this game. They've got a very explosive offense and some really good players at that side of the ball. And Kansas State, though, I think is going to have a lot of success running the football in this game. I don't think Arizona's front seven is going to be that good overall. I know they've got a few really good players there, but not enough to really slow down Kansas State's run game much. And Kansas State, I just think, is a little bit better team than Arizona. I think this will be a fairly high scoring game, but Kansas State is a much better coach team and the home team to where I think they win this one. So then on the road at BYU, a team that is just going to be awful this year. That's all there is to say about that. Kansas State should win pretty easily. So then Oklahoma State at home, a big game here. Oklahoma State's balanced and great offense is going to be tough for anyone to stop, especially defenses that aren't elite. And Kansas State's defense is good, but not elite. I think they'll score a lot of points on Kansas State. And then Kansas State, though, I think is going to have a lot of success running the football in this game because Oklahoma State's defensive line that was horrible last year. Now everyone is back from that defensive line last year, so you would expect a little bit of an improvement, but still, I wouldn't expect them to be very good there. Now Oklahoma State's linebackers are really good, so they might be able to slow them down a little bit. And I think Oklahoma State is the better team, but I have a feeling with this game being at Kansas State that Kansas State is going to win this one. But I do think this is going to be really close. A great game. So then on the road at Colorado, so I just talked about how physical of a team that Kansas State is. Well, Colorado is the opposite. They're as soft as a pillow cushion. Kansas State will beat them up at the line of scrimmage in this game. And Colorado's front seven is horrible, probably the worst in the Power Four again. They don't have any chance of slowing down Kansas State's run game. That Kansas State may run for 400 yards in this game, they could win this without even having to throw a pass. And uh, mm, uh, Kansas State, Dylan Edwards, a former running back at Colorado, will get to run all over his former team, and Deion Sanders will get to watch it, and he'll probably, of course, cover up the look on his face with sun glasses. And if I was to grade the coaching at Kansas State and Colorado, I'd at least give Chris Klieman an A minus, and I'd give for sure Deion Sanders an F minus. I think this will be a blowout. And then on the road at West Virginia, West Virginia has some similar things to Kansas State. They're not a great throwing team, but they're a great running team, and they can match Kansas State pretty well at the line of scrimmage. Now, I do think Kansas State is a little bit better than West Virginia, but West Virginia is a tough place to play even when they're not very good, and they're supposed to be pretty good again. So Kansas State would at this point already be at 6-0, and I think they'll lose this one. I think it'll be about time for them to lose a game, and I do think it'll be really close though. So then Kansas at home. So Kansas, even though they've been improving these last couple of years, still hasn't been able to beat Kansas State. And I still think Kansas State is a little bit ahead of Kansas, but they're close now. I think this will be a pretty close game. So this, though, I think is a bad matchup for Kansas because Kansas's strength of their defense I've seen is their secondary, and their front seven isn't very good. And Kansas State will take advantage of that and run a whole bunch. And Kansas State's passing game, at least right now, doesn't seem to be really a concern for anybody. And Kansas, I think, will score quite a bit in this game. Their offense, like Oklahoma State's, is good and balanced. But unlike Oklahoma State, Kansas doesn't have that good of an offensive line, and I think that could be a problem against Kansas State's defensive line to where they win this one. So then on the road at Houston. So I think this coach that Houston brought in from Tulane can eventually get them to being a pretty good team, but I don't think it's happening this year. Houston just doesn't have the defense to be able to slow down Kansas State's run game, and their offense I don't think is going to do a lot in this game against a pretty good Kansas State defense, to where I think Kansas State wins this one by at least a couple of scores. So then Arizona State, this should be an easy win. They're a team that might even be worse than Colorado. So then Cincinnati, another team that's probably even worse than Colorado, about as bad as Arizona State. This should be another easy win. And then they end the season on the road at Iowa State. So Iowa State, I think, could surprise and get a win or two against a team they're not supposed to get this year. So, Virginia Tech is getting a whole lot of hype this year, including from me, because they have so much production coming back. But Iowa State has almost exactly the same amount coming back as Virginia Tech does, and they have the exact same record as Virginia Tech last season, 7-6. And Iowa State and Virginia Tech are pretty similar with talent. And Iowa State is a tough place to play. And I think they get the upset against Kansas State in a close one. So then my final prediction for Kansas State is 10-2 overall and 7-2 in the conference. So even if they don't win the Big 12, this should be good enough to get them into the college football playoff. I think this is their ceiling. Kansas State, I'm sure, will lose at least 2 games, and I do think that their floor would be at 8-4, and 9-3 would be a good possibility too. So that will be it with this video, and please subscribe, and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.